here, and along with Adrienne Perry, I've been teaching a course that runs in conjunction with this reading series, and this is the 21st year of the Literary Festival, and funnily enough, Claudia Rankine was one of the first people I invited to come to Villanova, and I won't tell the story of that, but that was just, I just think it's wonderful that she's actually made it to Villanova after 20 years. And through all the years that have passed since then, since I first invited her to come here 21 years ago, she's been a friend and inspiration to me. And I'm happy to have this opportunity to thank her publicly for her generosity and for the example she sets as a fearless and I would say peerless public intellectual, a voice that allows us to fully recognize the world we live in and make. In a minute, I'm going to turn things over to two students from our class who will properly introduce Claudia, Cassie Liu and Danielle Fusaro. But first, there are a number of people I need to thank on behalf of the Creative Writing Program and the Literary Festival. Alan Drew, who's the director of Creative Writing and the Literary Festival, allowed me to welcome everyone because of my connection to Claudia, but it also gives me the opportunity to thank him for all of the work he has done this semester and every semester to make this reading series possible. So let's show Alan our appreciation. I also want to thank my co-teacher, Adrienne Perry, who's done so much work with me. And I need to thank Heather Hicks, chair of the English department, Adele Lindemeyer, dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, the Irish Studies program, Falvey Library, the honors program, and the program in writing and rhetoric. I just also want to just tell everybody that the final event of the Literary Festival is on April 25th at 7 o'clock. We're going to have Julia Kasdorf doing a reading from her new book called Shale Play, which is about fracking in Pennsylvania, and I think it'll be a really great event to come to. And that's going to be in the East Lounge of Doherty. And without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Danielle and Cassie.
Sorry, I'm just trying to... All right. As an American citizen and an American poet, Claudia Rankine is known by her readers and peers as fearless, not only in what she writes, but also how she writes. Within her poems, essays, and plays, Rankine addresses the topics of race, privilege, and oppression, all while blurring the lines between poetry and prose, and words and images, and challenging our definition of these types of writing. She is the author of 5 poetry collections, 2 of which, Don't Let Me Be Lonely and American Lyric, and Citizen and American Lyric, have gone on to win multiple awards, as well as multiple essays and plays, which includes The White Card, a play. Her many awards and honors include a 2017 John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship for Poetry, a 2016 MacArthur Fellowship, and a 2005 Academy Fellowship for Distinguished Poetic Achievement from the Academy of American Poets. Rankine has taught at the University of Houston, Case Western Reserve University, Barnard College, Pomona College, and is currently the Frederick Eisman Professor of Poetry at Yale. The winner of the 2014 National Book Critics Book Award in Poetry, Citizen, An American Lyric, is a textual museum that both personalizes and universalizes the experience of the Black body within the United States through a series of vignettes, poetry, a long-form essay, and contemporary works of art created by Black artists including Nick Cave, Glenn Ligon, and Toyin Odutula. Reaching into both history and current events, Citizen chronicles the long-standing history of exhaustion, terror, anger, and duty of the Black community. This history is told not only through images and words, but also through the visibility of Black ink on white pages. Citizen asks us to step into the shoes of individuals who are both rendered hyper-visible within white spaces, and yet invisible in these very same spaces. Most importantly, though, Citizen asks what it means to be a citizen in an anti-Black community. For some, it means enjoying a set of fundamental human rights. For others, it means having one existence continually both threatened and questioned, all while being told to let it go, move on. Rankine leaves us with a lesson of race, about race, violence, justice, and most importantly, the right to citizenship.
In Citizen, what is unsaid is just as, if not more, important than what is said. By closely intertwining pain and silence, Rankine challenges readers to confront their own silence about the violence towards and criminalization of the Black body. Rankine's use of the second person forces readers to recognize their role in a system that perpetuates the destruction of the Black mind, body, and culture. Rankine's You invites readers to engage with the text in a deeply intimate way and creates a profoundly experiential body of work by curating different forms of art that speak to the Black experience in America. As Cassie mentioned, Citizen crosses borders and boundaries. Rankine does not constrain poetry to the page, but permeates the text with works of art as well as situation videos that are watched alongside her poetry and move beyond the page and into the world. By freeing her writing from the limitations of genre, Rankine brings to light the ultimate goal of her agonizingly, exhaustively honest account of racism in America, to liberate the oppressed from a racially biased construction that seeps into the behaviors of one's strangers and even one's friends. Rankine seeks to call attention to the dehumanization of the Black community and to reclaim for it the respect and equality that should undoubtedly come with being a United States citizen. So without further ado, please join us in welcoming Claudia Rankine.
Good evening. Danielle and Cassie, thank you. That I love when the introduction is actually a reading of the work, since I am the work and not me. So thank you for that. That was beautiful. And thank you all for coming. I know I hate leaving my house, so so I'm always like really in admiration of those of you who managed to do it. I want to thank everyone who was involved in bringing me here, but especially Lisa Sewell, who has been a friend, a collaborator, an inspiration for as long as some of you have been alive. Is that even possible? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So thank you, Lisa, for being Lisa, the coolest professor on the planet. I'm gonna, we are going to perform Scene 2 of The White Card, which is my, my not latest, but latest publication. It came out of Citizen, and instead of telling you, I'm going to read to you, since it's more organized than what I would say, the introduction to the preface to the book, the play, and it will explain to you how it connects from Citizen, because I know a few of you have read Citizen. One evening, during a question and answer session, a white middle-aged man stood up. After movingly addressing my reading from Citizen, he asked me, "What can I do for you? How can I help you?" As I stood on stage regarding him, I wondered how to move his question away from me, my story, my body, to the more relevant issues and dynamics regarding American history and white guilt. Teje Cole's essay, The White Savior Industrial Complex, came back to me in that moment. Maybe it would have been better to use Cole's words directly, to quote his extension of Hannah Arendt into the realm of whiteness. The banality of evil transmutes into the banality of sentimentality. The world is nothing but a problem to be solved by enthusiasm. That's the Teje Cole quote, or this one from his book. The white savior industrial complex is not about justice. It's about having a big emotional experience that validates privilege. But in the moment, I decided to climb out from behind all my reading, references, and quotes, and engage his question personally, without the distancing scaffold of referential speak. His question struck me as an age-old defensive shield against identifying with acts of racism at the hands of liberal, well-meaning white people, the kind he had just listened to me read about. His question did the almost imperceptible work of positioning him outside the problems Citizen interrogates, while maintaining his position of superiority relative to me in his act of offering to help me. He would help answer not only my problems, but those of all Black people, which he only at that moment recognized, but otherwise was not implicated in or touched by. He seemed oblivious to the realization that our problems as a society are dependent on his presence, despite my project of saying this in all the ways I know how. The afterlife of white supremacy, to appropriate and flip on its head Saidiya Hartman's The Afterlife of Slavery, is all our problem. Cole writes, all he sees is need, and he sees no need to reason out the need for the need. If he were to reason out the need for the need, he would understand he need not invite himself to the scene. He is already there. There was so much that could be said about the often meaningless reparative largesse of whiteness in the face of human pain and suffering. But in the minutes we had for our exchange, I simply responded to the man, I think the question you should be asking is what you can do for you. He didn't appreciate my answer. From inside his theater of noblesse oblige, which seems to come close to condescension, but really exists in the depths of repression of American complicity with structural anti-Black racism, rose an anger that I confess I didn't expect. This is what he said. If that is how you answer questions, he responded, then no one will ask you anything. The germinal thought, the originating impulse of the white card came out of this man's question and his response to my response. In his imagination, where did I go wrong? Was I initially intended to express gratitude for his interests? Were his feelings and the feelings of the audience in general my first priority? Was recognition of his likability a necessary gateway into his ability to apprehend my work? I really wanted to have the conversation he started. I didn't come all this way not to engage. But as the affect theorist Lauren Belant has stated, what does it do to one's attachment to life to have constantly to navigate atmospheres of white humorlessness? It occurred to me after this incident that an audience member might read all the relevant books on racism, see all the documentaries and films, and know the correct phrase to mention, but in the moment of dialogue or confrontation, retreat into a space of defensiveness, anger, silence, which is to say he might retreat into the comfort of control, which begins by putting me back in my imagined place. Perhaps any discussion of racism does not begin from a position of equality for those involved. Maybe the expectation is for the performance of something I, as a black woman, cannot see even as I object to its presence. Perhaps the only way to explore this known and yet invisible dynamic is to get in a room and act it out. Theater is by its very nature a space for and of encounter. The writing of the white card was a way to test and imagine conversation regarding race and racism among strangers. The dinner party as a social setting for the sharing of both space and conversation in the home of a white family seemed the benevolent, natural, if not exactly neutral, site. The characters have come together to consider the terms of the exchange of art while they get to know one another. What brings everyone to the room is a desire to be seen and known, but what keeps them there is the complexity of our desire to be understood. So the white card takes place in two scenes. The first is in the home of Charles Spencer. And Charles Spencer's wife, Virginia Spencer, and his art dealer, Eric Smith, and his son, Alex Spencer, are at the dinner. Also at the dinner is Charlotte Cummings. She's a black artist. They have her over because they want to buy a series of work that she's doing. And that work, she recreates crime scenes that have never been seen. And Charles has a foundation where he buys work that portrays black suffering. So it doesn't have to be by a black artist, but it has thematically to address the history of black suffering in the United States. And for this reason, he wants to buy this new series by Charlotte, which is photographs, recreated photographs of the shooting in Charleston. That's where the church was, right? And the 9 people who were gunned down by Dylan Roof. So she comes to the house, and because they're having this black artist over, their son is a college student at Columbia, and they invite him because they think he would like to meet Charlotte. And while he's there, they have another art piece that they've been meaning to give to him. And they hand it to him at the dinner. And it's an autopsy report of Michael Brown. Charlotte sees this and begins to wonder about her own practice as an artist. So that's scene 1. And what you will be hearing from Elisa Gonzalez, who's an MA student in theater, and Nikki, I don't want to, how do you say that? Menotiades, who's also an MA student in theater, will be scene 2, where Charles has called Charlotte and asked if he could come to her studio to discuss her latest show that he's just gone to see. So that's where we're going to pick up. Thank you.
Charles Spencer,
It's been a while.
almost a year.
I appreciate you taking the time to see me at such short notice.
I was happy to get your email this morning. I'm glad it worked out. How are Virginia and Alex?
They're both fine. We're all fine.
Is Alex still doing his activism?
Still out on the streets. You should know he mentioned you not long ago. He got it in his head that we should have apologized for not inviting other people of color to our dinner.
Excuse me?
It was just that he felt we put you in the situation of explaining blackness, of speaking for all people of color.
Inviting more black people to explain would have spread out the work?
I see your point.
Alex is sweet. Considerate too. In any case, Virginia did send me an apology. She said it wasn't your usual practice to devolve into a shouting arena at the end of dinner. That was kind of her.
Oh. I hadn't realized she'd been in touch.
Did she TiVo the Australian Open again this year?
No, Serena wasn't playing. We watched Federer win his 20th Grand Slam in real time. That was pretty exciting. Tarnished, unfortunately, by that American from Tennessee who made the quarterfinals.
With his Facebook page of white supremacy likes?
You know, it was a real disappointment to us that you decided to give the Charleston pieces to the Studio Museum.
May I take your coat and scarf?
Do you have a dark room?
The last time I used one was in school.
Really?
I've always worked digitally. There's so much more freedom if you're willing to lose the romance of darkness.
Touche. I see you're a Nikon person.
My mother gave me that one for high school graduation.
Is this her? She's a beauty. I'm assuming that's your dad next to her.
That's right.
Are you their only child?
Yes, they were focused on their careers.
Ah. What do they do?
Lawyer, doctor, except my father doesn't have patience. He tracks the path of diseases.
I thought you didn't shoot film.
I don't. It was a gift to myself. I just think cameras with their collapsible lenses are beautiful.
You have others?
That's what I collect.
You have others?
It's a collection of one. It's from Berlin, 1936.
You know, Ernst Leitz, who manufactured the Leica, helped get the Jews out of Nazi Germany.
Yes, the Leica Freedom Train.
Post-war, the Allies blew up photos of the emancipated Jews and the dead bodies in the camps and forced the Germans to look at them to combat anti-Semitism.
Did it ever occur to you it could have been the opposite effect? All those bodies could have fed their anti-Semitism?
You would have to be an animal to see it that way.
Not an animal.
Whose photo is this? These corpses with the cloth covering them.
It's taken by Gilles Perez.
Gilles Perez? Is he a person of color?
What? He's white. He's a French magnum photographer, does documentary, Bosnia, Rwanda. Charles, why are you here? Are you shopping for more Black Death?
You know where I went yesterday?
How would I know that?
Eric took me to see your new show. That work was unrecognizable to me. What are you up to?
Up to? I take it you don't like it?
What is there to like?
Wow. Fortunately, the critics don't share your opinion. Personally, I feel it's my most relevant work to date.
Relevant to what? I have no idea what to feel about it.
That surprises me after everything that has happened in the past year. Charlottesville, DACA, Me Too, our daily tweets, the indictments, the tax plan, shithole countries, the government shutdown, the shooting in Las Vegas, and the high school shooting in Parkland. What else?
It has been a year, hasn't it? That's how the show felt to me, like a reaction. I have to admit, I wondered if it was a response to our dinner.
No. Well, actually, yes.
So it was the autopsy piece.
But not because you bought it. I couldn't get what you said out of my head.
I said a lot of things. What exactly?
That my work was no different from that piece. Not long after our dinner, I went to the Whitney Biennial. I was standing in front of the Emmett Till painting, the one that caused all the controversy. And I could think was your foundation. I kept wondering about your desire to collect Black Death. I had this image of my work being held as in the hold of a ship. All that art just packed in like the dead and dying bodies themselves.
Okay.
I don't mean to suggest you celebrate, that you shouldn't celebrate the work of Black artists. It's the emphasis on Black death that I needed to question for myself. What does it mean to portray Black suffering as art? Just looking at the Charleston crime scene, I realized what I wasn't seeing.
What weren't you seeing?
You. Isn't it funny? I realized I wasn't seeing you.
But I'm not someone to look at.
Aren't you? I can't stop thinking about those Michael Brown videos. It's like nobody could see the white officer because a Black man died.
I know how much a part of the system I am, but I am not the officer with the gun.
But you're locked into your imagination of Blackness, just like the officer was locked into his. I really believe he thought he was being attacked. He certainly wasn't seeing the person in front of him. My God, how many bullet holes were in that autopsy piece of yours?
It was horrific. But my imagination of Blackness and his are completely different. All white men don't look alike.
Look, I don't want to think of the officer as a monster or Hulk Hogan or a demon or whatever. And I don't think you're a monster. But his obsession with Black people as criminals and your obsession with Black people as victims are cut from the same cloth. Neither is human.
I just reject that. I am not someone controlled by an imagination I don't understand.
Charles, we were all raised wrong. Art is not going to change the laws, but it might make apparent something we didn't see about how we all grew up. At least, that's what I hope for my own work.
That's what my foundation's invested in. That's the point, exactly.
You keep wanting to focus on Black victims and dead Black bodies. I understand that, but maybe we've been looking in the wrong direction. Walk it backwards. For example, look at this.
Who are these women? Soccer moms?
Take a closer look.
They seem to be mostly white women.
That's true. What else do you see?
Is it a church group? There's an American flag, maybe a town hall meeting for mothers. I don't know, just tell me.
They're women in prison. The prison you built in Ohio. I doubt you would have said soccer moms if they were Black.
You don't know what I would have said because I don't know what I would have said.
In any case, your imagination, like mine, like everyone's, is a racial imagination. Except you don't really think of yourself as having a race and being shaped by the beliefs of that race.
My attention to Black suffering is my attempt to get my whiteness out of our way.
Or your attention to Black suffering allows you not to look at your own whiteness.
I understand my relationship to privilege and power.
Well, all your attention to your whiteness didn't allow you to see the approaching white nationalists in the White House.
Many of us were shocked by what happened and is happening.
Some weren't, some still aren't. This administration didn't beam down into our democracy. It's an amplification of what's already been there.
We were focused on the bodies littering the streets and filling the prisons.
Your prisons.
And shouldn't we have been? People were dying. Aggie Gund just sold a Liechtenstein for $150 million to finance a criminal justice fund.
That's great, but black people have always been dying. And it's not because of black on black crime. Whites have only just noticed that they themselves are doing the killing.
Here we go again. I truly am trying to find a way through.
Charles, have you ever had the feeling you were all wrong?
All wrong?
Completely misguided. I mean, I was making my work, but I didn't understand what the desire for it was all about. There I was, handing over Black Death Spectacle.
Black Death Spectacle. That is just millennial rhetoric. That painting of Emmett Till only caused all the controversy because the artist was white. But I was moved by that painting, as I was moved by the painting of Philando Castile's murdered body at the same Whitney exhibition. No one objected to that painting, presumably because the painter was black.
No, nobody objected to that painting because the artist has a developed craft and a deep consciousness of his history. If you recall, in the Philando Castile painting, the policeman with the gun is also present.
But what moved me was that both artists were reflecting back the victims.
Maybe you think those artists were making those paintings for you, Charles, because the black body is in a state you're comfortable with.
I have news for you. They are making that work for me. Who the hell else is going to buy it? Not you. Do you really believe that dead and dying bodies are acceptable to me?
Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, Eric Gardner, Sandra Bland, Trayvon Martin, Philando Castile.
Okay.
Any convictions?
But that doesn't turn me into a... Can I get a glass of water? How old are you? How old were you in 1998?
98. In my early 20s. Why?
So around the age Alex is now. Jeannie and I had 2 toddlers then. On the news came the report that white supremacists dragged a black man to his death in Texas, a lynching by car. They tied him to the bumper and dragged him until his head and various other limbs detached from the trunk of his body. I had nightmares for months.
I was about to graduate college. My mother called me. I remember not being able to get out of bed that day.
I thought all that was over. I remember being relieved that the boys were young. Because how to explain? I wanted them to inherit a different world. I started doing what I could for
For me?
Fair enough. But also for me and for them. For the boys. The only thing I could think to do was find a way to prevent the forgetting. I don't want to contribute to the silence. Our silences. By showing work that exposes racism, I think I can keep our history in the forefront. Black deaths are a part of that history.
But blackness can't be reduced to suffering if that means you lose the context and the history of how we got here. Let me show you something I've been thinking about. You must know the artist Carrie James Marshall.
I was at the Met Brewer opening, yes. It was crowded. Room after room of huge, colorful paintings of black life.
Did you notice this piece he calls Heirlooms and Accessories? It isolates the faces of white women watching a lynching and puts them in lockets.
I don't remember seeing this.
I'm not surprised you didn't notice it. When Marshall turns his attention to black suffering, he sees the ordinary complicity of white people.
Are you saying the faces of the white women are more horrible than the images of the lynched men?
In some ways, yes. That's only hard to accept because whiteness has been reduced to goodness in all of our psyches. I believed Dylan Roof's crime scene should have been made public. And now I still think on that. But the closer I got to those dead bodies, the more inhumane I became. I was making objects of people to give to you. This realization upended my whole practice. I want you to consider these without you taking them personally. Treat it as research, as a form of study.
That's me at Pace Gallery. That's me outside the Met Gala. Virginia and I at Lincoln Center. What is this? How did you...
I went to the openings and photographed you as I would any subject.
You what?
A couple of months after our dinner, I was at the Lynette Yadam Boakye opening at the New York Museum. And when I saw you, I approached to say hello, but you didn't recognize me. In that moment, I felt like the artwork you collected. I was like an object you could be interested in or not, depending on the day.
I didn't notice you in a crowd, and you decided to stalk me?
I photographed you at an event. You looked straight in the camera. See? This one here. After I printed this, I thought I might do a series.
You had no right. I could sue you for invasion of privacy.
These are public events.
So, your show that's getting all the great reviews, all those images of white skin wallpapering the gallery, I knew it. I knew it. Charlotte, is that my skin? Is that why it's called Exhibit C? Do I understand this correctly?
Who cares whose skin it is? What difference does it make?
I care. Exhibit C cares. Do you think I'm an idiot? This is fucking insane. I've worked so hard. I think you'd be grateful.
Gratitude? Is that what you need from me?
I took an interest in you.
Now I'm taking an interest in you. Come on, Jesus, Charles. What's so wrong about talking about whiteness? And who knows more about being white than you?
You know nothing about me. You don't know how I've lived my life. You have no idea what's in my heart. Charles grabs her by the shoulders. What is it you think you know?
What are you doing?
Charlotte, look at me. Tell me what you see. Do you see anything beyond our history?
Charleston, Charlottesville. That's what I know. Our history. The present. What do you mean beyond? Beyond what?
Can you ever see Charles Spencer? Tell me that you understand I am not that history. Tell me that you see me.
All I've been doing is looking at you for months. It's like you're Moses. Doors open for you, people step aside for you. You have so much mobility. Charles, what do you want me to say?
If I am only ever a white man to you, how far will that get us?
What do you see when you look at me?
The daylight.
What does that even mean?
You of all people should understand that. You and I are out in the world, and it's as if there's a fault line that runs the entirety of our lives between us. On your terms, there's no way for me to get to you on the other side.
If that were only true, despite all the segregation, the tragedy is we are on the same side. We've always been here together, shipwrecked here together.
You're right. We're here together.
Wrecked together, solitary here together.
But the feeling is the feeling of a gap.
The gap, Charles, is caused because you refuse the role you actually play.
I don't need you to show me me.
Me. You don't need me to show you anything. That's probably the first honest thing you've said.
Fuck you, Charlotte.
I'm already fucked. You know, I have to admit, I thought you were different than all the others, but in the end, for you, I'm just this annoyance that won't conform to your good works.
You're acting as if I think of you as some kind of project.
Well, don't you?
I do believe I can help.
If you actually want to help, why don't you make you your project?
What about me? My money? My power? My mobility, as you say?
I mean, the mass murder and devastation that comes with you being you.
Me being me? Mass murder, devastation. It's hard not to hear that as a completely irrational attack.
Racism exists outside of reason. Black people have never been human.
That is so hopeless.
Go further into that hopelessness, and then we can begin to really see each other.
You're right to keep me a part of it. My whiteness, it needs to be faced.
At its deepest level, yes.
It's just skin. And yet I know it's power too.
Dehumanizing power.
What is skin? I've heard dust is mostly skin. Is this my skin? Yours?
Charles,
We're shedding skin all the time. Thousands of cells a minute, but it renews itself. I've never actually looked at my skin. How many cells is it? How porous is it? How many layers are there? Where is it darkest? Where lightest? He begins to unbutton his shirt. All my skin is holding me together. Good Lord. All this skin shields me. It protects me from being you. It's like the badge of the police. He removes his shirt and turns his back to her. I'm ready. Charlotte, you can shoot me now. He stands there with his back to her and arms at his side. Leonard Cohen's Different Sides begins to play. Charlotte ties her smock around her waist and, taking off her shoes, steps onto a crate, binding her hands with his scarf. She stares at Charles's back. Charles turns around. His horror and confusion are apparent. There is the click and flash of a camera.
So that was the first iteration of investigating what it means to have a conversation. The idea that in a conversation, you're reliant on the other person because you can build something together that you can't build on your own. That's the definition that the theorist Lauren Ballant uses. I'm going to read a little bit from an essay from my new book, Just Us, which is a kind of an anatomy of how conversations work. I'm at a dinner where the whys and wherefores of the 2016 presidential election come up, because they do. And one guest, it turns out, is writing a book. In the description of the book, the role of racism is barely mentioned. Hold up. It's been my belief anti-black racism was the mighty engine that brought our current president to power. The very president who refers to himself as a nationalist. Many factors are the rhetorical tide I swim upstream against, as if George Wallace hadn't attributed his political success to the articulation of racist rhetoric. Despite his declared neutral feelings about black people, Wallace ran on segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, and promised to protect Anglo-Saxon Southland. What exactly has changed? There was no way to predict that white Democrats who had voted for former President Obama would vote in key states for a fascist regime, is the persistent retort. Our resident expert added that he didn't have a crystal ball, as if unarmed dead black people weren't lying in our American streets, or white people weren't calling the police on black people without cause, with full knowledge of all the ways that could go wrong and end in a loss of life. And as if our 45th president hadn't begun his preliminary run on the lie that voters had been duped by a president who wasn't born in America. My dogged insistence meant I was sailing closer and closer to the trope of the angry black woman. I wasn't completely right. There were the Russians, the Electoral College, and misogyny. But I needed these people to admit the obvious. Why couldn't they understand? I would rather be wrong. Would gladly join them in the perception of an unpredictable world if I could. I learned early that being right pales next to staying in the room. All kinds of things happen as the night unfolds. But sometimes I become caught by the idea that repetition occurs if the wheels keep spinning. Repetition is insistence, and one can only collude so much. Sometimes I just want to throw myself inside the gears. Sometimes, as James Baldwin said, I want to change one word or a single sentence. It's harder than you would think, because white people don't really want to change if it means they need to think differently than they do about who they are. We have precedent in Lady Bird and Lyndon Johnson, who blacklisted Eartha Kitt after she confronted the Johnsons about Vietnam at a luncheon at the White House. Democrats all. Whiteness does want the kind of progress that reflects what it values, a reflection of itself. And as if to underline this, a metaphorical white hand reaches out to pull me back into the fold from the perilous edge of angry black womanhood. A white woman effectively ends the conversation on 45's campaign tactics by turning her gaze towards the dessert tray. How beautiful, she says. Homemade brownies on a silver tray. Hers is the fey gesture I have seen exhibited so often by white women in old movies, women who are overcome by shiny objects. It's so blatant a redirect, I can't help but ask aloud the most obvious question. Am I being silenced? I'm aware my question breaks the rules of social engagement. I'm aware I will never be invited back to this house, back into the circle of these white people. I understand inadvertently causing someone to feel shame isn't cool. But am I being silenced? I wanted this white woman to look me in the eye and say, yes, yes you are. I wanted her to own her action and not cower. I would have liked her then. Instead, all of us around the table have to watch her sink into her seat as she looks down at her hands, as if I've refused to shake them. Now the others have to take sides. White solidarity needs to be reestablished. It's then I understand I forfeited the game the minute I stepped into a house where I am the only black guest. The woman and I could have started conversing instead of one of us using language to erase the next moment. Doesn't she see that even as a white woman, she remains subject to the arbitrary power of our executive branch? Shouldn't we get clear on how we got here, or our alliances set? Does she see my insistence as its own form of erasure, or is white civility simply being put to work to maintain the fiction of white benevolence and the uncouthness of blackness? As I wonder if it's time to leave in order to restore my own and the dinner's equilibrium, someone else steers the conversation consciously or unconsciously away from the brownies to a gentler way of speaking about race and children. The question at hand is whether a child study center should delete the word study from its title. The center is located in a city with a majority black population. The dominant feeling around the table seems to be that the concern over the name is frivolous. The center is attached to the academic institution, after all, where all is done in the name of study and research. As I sit there listening to these people, these polite white people discuss this, I realize the history of experimenting on black people does not hold a place in their referential memory. No one makes mention of Tuskegee syphilis experiments on black men, or the military experiments of mustard gas on black soldiers, among other non-whites, or J. Mariam Sims' experimentation on black women. No mention of Henrietta Lacks. My historical memory starts tossing examples at me like it's having its own dinner party. In the real one, no one wonders what the parents of the black children think when they see the word study associated with the center. Knowing that my silence is active in the room, I stay dumb because I want to make a point of that dumbness. Among white people, black people are allowed to talk about their precarious lives, but they are not allowed to implicate the present company in that precarity. They're not allowed to point out the causes of that precariousness. Sarah Amen writes in The Phenomenology of Whiteness that the person who names the problem becomes the problem. To create discomfort by pointing out facts is seen as socially unacceptable. Let's get over ourselves. It's structural, not personal. I want to shout at everyone, including myself. But all the structures and all the diversity planning put in place to alter those structures and all the desires of whites to assimilate blacks in their day-to-day lives come with the continued outrage at rage. All the perceived outrage at me, the guest who brings all of herself to dinner, all of it, her body, her history, her fears, her furious fears, her expectations, is in the end so personal. The mutual anxieties and angers blow invisible in the room. A wind, blustery, turbulent, squally, overcast, find a discomfort level. I push my brownie around on my plate. I am middle-aged and overweight. I shouldn't eat this. I shouldn't eat anything. Nothing. Moments like these make me understand that the not knowing on the part of whiteness is an active investment in not wanting to know. And the perceived tiresome insistence on presenting one's knowledge on the part of blackness might be a fruitless and childish exercise. Do I believe either of these positions enough to change my ways? Might as well stop the sun from rising tomorrow. Yes. Had the woman who admired the dessert tray, in an attempt to redirect the conversation, said to me, "Here's your coat. What's your hurry?" Now that would have made me smile. The corner of my mouth would have lifted and raised my cheeks to form crow's feet around my eyes. I would have smiled with my eyes. Thank you very much. Good night. Am I answering questions? Apparently I'm answering questions. It's it's based in part on the work of the Canadian photographer.
Sorry.
No. It's going to come to me. I think I'm a little tired. But whose picture we pulled up earlier? Jeff Wall. And Jeff Wall in his pictures is interested in this notion of unfreedoms. And so in walking around, he sometimes sees moments of microaggressions that happen so quickly that he can't photograph them, so he restages them. The most famous one is a white couple walking, and there's an Asian man who walks by them, and the white man goes like this. So it's, a gesture that he probably saw that took about 2 seconds, and then he got actors to restage it. So in Act 1, Charlotte talks about Jeff Wall's work and the way in which his interest in catching these moments exists behind her work in some way. Thank you.
How do you balance as a poet, especially when we're talking about things like this? Honestly, like the emotional exhaustion associated with it. Because it took me about 2 months to read your book because it was such an emotional book. So, as a poet, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, it's a question that I've had before, and the collecting of stories for Citizen was probably more exhausting than the writing of Citizen. Because when you're writing it, you're sort of interested in what language can do for you. But when you are listening to actual people tell you what has happened to them, and you're in relation with them and have to hold what they're giving you emotionally, I found that very exhausting. But then when you're writing, you're in a different place in your brain because you're making a thing, and so it becomes more of a kind of game of attrition to get the thing done. How do you do it? How do you make it? How do you make visible something that's invisible in a sense? But my new book, a couple of people have read the new book this week, and they said to me, it's so exhausting. And I hadn't, I worked on the individual pieces, but I hadn't really sat down and read it from cover to cover. So yesterday I did that. I sat down and I read it from cover to cover, and it was exhausting. I did feel like, this is not fun. I mean, it's a book that has these conversations in them. And it's a book where I have shown up. I mean, I show up in this book as fully as I can show up on the page. And I did find that a little bit exhausting, to kind of stay with the emotion, to kind of dissect what it is I was actually feeling. And often I was much more irritated than I had initially thought I was as I was writing it out.
Sorry. Thank you very much. You've talked about how the two most recent books are related to the one before it, Citizen, and we all see those connections. Very interesting. As somebody who's studied your work more generally, I'm struck sort of one book back too by how Citizen is related to Don't Let Me Be Lonely, which seems so different from the work that came before it, formally.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I never thought to ask this, but was there some moment that you can remember or isolate where the sort of method that you developed in Don't Let Me Be Lonely presented itself to you? Was it not really a moment so much as something that emerged over time? Because it seems like that unlocked something sort of for you as a poet, and I'm just wondering if you have an account in your own mind how that
worked. Well, you know, the earlier books, The End of the Alphabet and Plot, were books where I was really interested in coming up with a kind of language that accounted for emotion without narrative. You know, because I find a lot, I don't know if you guys have this experience, but I find a lot that people talk to you and they're like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then you know, she said this, and then you're not really concerned with the details of what they're saying. What you're really listening for is how they feel. Like you take your cue of how you're going to feel by how they feel. And so all of the narratives are there to express to you, I felt terrible, I felt bad, I felt happy. So I think Plot and Don't Let Me Be Lonely were really like, how do you do it without the history, without the story behind it? How do you get the emotion to live on its own? And then I went to London to live for a while. My husband was setting up a company in London. And it was just when Bush, who is now a hero apparently, was running for president. And he was in a debate, and somebody asked him about, he was governor of Texas at the time, and someone asked him about the lynching of James Beard, and he didn't remember. And it had happened in his state. And the lynching of a man, it was like the most gruesome thing I'd ever heard, somebody tying a person behind, and this is a story that Charles tells, and dragging him till his body's parts come from off of the trunk of his body. And so I think that moment became the moment when I thought, oh, I need to come up with a form that carries the narrative and the history with it. And I was thinking about how to do it. And John, my husband, was in Paris, and I had gone down to spend the weekend with him, and he was busy doing work. And I remember exactly the moment this happened. I was walking from the Pompidou back to our hotel, and I started grabbing the napkins off of the tables, the cafe, the outside tables, and writing on them. And that was the start of Don't Let Me Be Lonely, because somehow something between that visit at the museum and me walking back to that hotel triggered the form for Don't Let Me Be Lonely. And so I had all of these little white paper napkins in my pocket by the time I got back to the hotel. And that idea that you can bring, or you have to bring, the history and the details in, and the sentence will have to be the organizing principle of the piece. Well, the book there are all these things that happen when I'm working on a book that maybe only I know because they're only important to me. So when I was working on Don't Let Me Be Lonely, it became in my mind a kind of editorial that was speaking back to the news and to life. And so because of that, I wanted that long form that sort of mimicked editorials in the newspaper. And then I wanted a kind of black and white book, which meant that the images had to be less artistic and more graphic. And the television was in there. And so that determined a lot. Like once you figure that out, it determines not only typeface and fonts and size of the book, it also determines what kinds of images you can use. In Citizen, the trick was, how do I get images that live together? And so with the exception of the Turner, which is the last piece, I knew that if I was going to use historical photographs, then I was going to need to work more with photography than with painting. And so that kind of took a lot of people off the table, unless it was a painter like Marshall who was then going to do a piece like Heirlooms and Accessories, which is not in Citizen, but that's not the point. But so with this book, this is a book in response to fake news and the Just Us. So the images are more editorial and less artistic because they have to live up against actual fact-checking notes. Because the fact-checking notes, which have to do with a very sort of scholarly use of text and FBI reports and police reports, So you want the relationship between the image and the quality of the supporting material to live in the same house. Which is not to say there aren't some images that could find its way in, but that's how the term, it's like you build a house, and once you build a house, certain things can't go in that house unless you're wild and crazy, which I'm not. So so it becomes the rules get made as the structure firms itself up. Oh, sorry. Yes? Okay. And there's a guy behind you, too. Yeah.
First, I just want to thank you for coming. In the scene that was acted out in the White Party, alluded to how whites paying sole attention to the black suffering in general distracts them from the role they play in that suffering. So I'm curious as to what role you think reparations would have in either bringing attention to or distracting from whites, or the role that whites play in that suffering.
Well, I think reparations, it depends on how you think about reparations, right? Like if, white people often you'll hear them say, and I use white people as a big category, but obviously I mean it as a position. Because there are white people who probably don't belong in the white people category, but there's some white people who believe that reparations is about money. Like, either we should give some money to these people, or we shouldn't give any money to these people, but they think it's about money. But if you think about reparations in terms of just righting wrongs, like maybe all the schools can be like schools funded where white children go. To me, that would be reparations. That the quality of education becomes equal across the board. That would be a form of reparations. The quality of loans given out to potential homeowners equal across the board. That would be a form of reparations. So, it's kind of like, the new thing where everybody says, before we begin, we must acknowledge that we are on Lakota land. And every time I hear that, I'm waiting for, and we should also acknowledge that we will never give it back. So like, that would be reparations to me. Like, just tell the truth. Just tell the truth. So I think that I just would love if we could all just start from a place of the truth. And then if we agreed that all the resources went to this school and none went to that school. I mean, one of the pieces in this book is about District 3 in New York. Did you guys hear about this? It's the Upper West Side and what the developers call South Harlem. That area has been so gentrified that all the public schools now are very white. Majority white students, some Asians, but majority white. The school board has decided that they need to integrate the schools. So we're talking about Columbia faculty, parents, and others who live in that neighborhood. There were meetings where they said things like, we don't want the schools integrated because the students, what was the great term? Will feel like imposters. So the students were the minority students. And so what does that mean, they will feel like imposters? So if they come to a school where they get better educated, they will be imposter white people or imposter educated kids. But these are people like professional, educated Americans with college and higher degrees standing up and saying, no, we do not want these schools educated. You can go online and look it up. They're like, this is unfair to our kids. We don't want them here. And this was last year. This happened last year. And not in the South. And the Upper West Side of New York City. And, luckily the principal was like, I'm going to release this to the public. And he sent the video of the school board meeting. He posted it online, which is how we know about it. Because he said, this is not acceptable. We have to consider children, all our children. What he said was, we have to consider all our children, not just the ones in our house, our children. But now they're double-dealing so much that it will end up, the compromises will end up back, keeping the schools majority white, no doubt. So, long answer to your question. I mean, I think sentimentality around white benevolence happens when people are not willing to see how they are complicit in the system as it stands and feel as if they can have a moment of goodness and then go back to their life as it was before. And reparations, if one thinks about it structurally, in terms of writing the structure, creating some equality within what we consider inalienable rights, like a good education, good health care, then I think we would be moving forward. You know, whites have 10 times the wealth of black people on average. 10 times the wealth of black people on average. That is not accidental. Thank you very much.